You guys are so cute. We're on. Hello and welcome to our first episode of Snack
and Yapp.
And this is Poppy Melllor, our guest.
Thank you very much for inviting me today.
Poppy, we're so happy that you're here. We've honestly been having a great time so far, so.
Yes, we've had a lot of fun. And actually, so this is our first episode, but it's also Poppy's first time on a podcast.
It is indeed.
Okay, great. And yeah, let's talk about sex because, Poppy, what is your job?
I am a sex therapist. So I talk about sex all the time.
Fantastic. We love
That's
it.
all you do. 24/7.
I have no other interests. That's all I think about.
I mean, in reality, I'm a relationship therapist and a sex therapist. So I deal with individuals and couples who are struggling either in their relationships or with sex. That can cover all sorts of things, from not having any sex to it not going up, it not going down, it not going in, and it not coming out almost, although that one's a bit personal. I mean, relationships are complicated, aren't they? And they come in so many different shapes and sizes. So I will be dealing generally with people who either want to stay together but don't know how to, or don't know whether they want to stay together, or sometimes with people who aren't together but are still having to struggle with sort of co-parenting or sort of conjoined families, and help them through that.
Let's take a step back. Could you tell us a little bit kind of how you got to becoming a sex therapist? Like, were you always in this sector?
No, so I had two previous careers to this. I studied as an architect originally, and interestingly, architecture is actually quite psychological, because you're always thinking about how people use spaces and how people are going to use houses and homes, etc. So I think I was always interested in psychology, and then came back and worked at Morgan Stanley in investment banking. From that, I was headhunted out to set up a digital TV company, and actually the digital television, we were looking at how people would start interacting with their TV through a remote control. So how you'd get a video on demand service, and how you might be able to order a pizza while watching your movie. And so again, we had teams of psychologists helping us help understand sort of how to create those early graphical user interfaces that you now see and take for granted at your age. You guys have no idea what the amount of thought that went into what we were trying to do in the development of, how are we going to get them to do anything apart from press 1, 2, 3, 4? In a way that probably seemed prehistoric to you guys.
Yeah, we can't relate.
I know, but behind everything that you do, there were brains and there were thoughts and there were psychologists going over every single thing.
There was Poppy.
Poppy
was always there.
And so I think I was always really, really interested in human behaviour. And then I took about a 2-month career break and thought, I really, really want to go into psychology and into couple therapy. And a girlfriend happened to say to me, hey, look, there's this course, do you want to come and do it with me? And I was like, yeah, why not?
That's crazy how even though you had such different career paths, they all had this common ground of dealing with people and how people feel and how people react.
I think there was definitely sort of a trail of breadcrumbs from what I wanted originally to do at university, which was psychology, but it got derailed into architecture. And those sort of breadcrumbs have always been through every bit that I was doing. So by the time I got to that point of choosing, it felt a very natural choice.
Yeah, so from Morgan Stanley to sex.
It's a bit of a... Exactly.
It's a little bit of a...
As you were saying earlier, it's like the most normal career progression there is. Whilst working at Morgan Stanley, specifically, did you ever have a point where you realized, okay, I can't keep on doing this. This is not for me?
No, I loved it there. It was really fun, really dynamic, very sexist at the time. Comments on the length of my skirt would be pretty much daily. If I ever wore a trouser suit, the guys on the trading debt floors would be like, your boss should make you wear a skirt.
Oh my goodness, that's insane.
Things like that. It was insane, but it kind of gives you a bit of resilience to the male psyche, should we say. And actually it is a very useful tool in terms of not being threatened by that and not being sort of intimidated by very powerful people at times. It's a great training ground for that in life.
While you were at your desk in Morgan Stanley, it was just the idea of sex and sex therapy simmering in the back of your brain, or how did you end up doing quite an uncommon, I'd say, profession?
No, just to let's blow away all your fantasies about me sitting there thinking about sex therapy and thinking about sex.
I'm leaving.
I was literally...
This is not what I signed up for. What do you mean?
No, there wasn't time to breathe in that job. But I don't think I would have thought about it. I mean, there was a very early experience of somebody saying, oh, we're not having good sex, you're not having orgasms, you should go and see a psychiatrist. And that was happening when I was doing my degree, and I was like, oh, what do you know? There's people that deal with sex. That's really interesting. So I think that little nugget was lodged in my brain at about the age of 21, thinking, this could be quite interesting.
Yeah.
You could talk about sex all day.
Yeah, that's something fantastic, honestly.
Which, you know, and I think there is a part of me that always, when people say, oh, you shouldn't talk about that, or we shouldn't talk about that, has always made me want to go, let's talk about it. It's crazy not to be able to talk about these things.
Yeah,
We all want to do it, or if we're not doing it, there's a reason why we're not doing it. And it's just, why is this stuff kind of literally kept under the covers?
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Why is it so taboo, in fact? Like the whole discourse around sexuality, I don't know, it's always been seen as something like, oh, you shouldn't talk about it.
And also 100% everything that is forbidden is appealing.
Yeah, that's so true.
In a certain way. And more than anything, sex, which is the most natural thing in the world, and yet people feel a lot of shame around it, and just in general it has to seem more complicated than what it is, which should be instead fun to explore now.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say the word shame. I think a lot of my job is around reducing shame around it.
Yeah.
Because we take shame from family of origin, we take shame from religious context, we take shame from societal norms, we take shame from all of our friendships, and we pile it into what's this area of sex. And so it makes it really impossible. So a lot of my job is literally saying, let's just get rid of the shame and think about what's going on and see what you can do in that space. When I did my original training, the sex therapy wasn't part of it. So I'd be talking to couples about their relationships, and I'd be talking about sex and then going, what do I do with this? You know, no one else seems to be talking about it at the time so much. Or it wasn't part of the original training I did. I was doing couple therapy originally and then did a master's in sex. Yeah.
A master's in sex.
Yeah.
That's my dream.
Sex.
Yeah, and I'm just curious, how was going back to studying? You know, you had already done architecture, and then you had already worked, and then you had already done all of these different things, and suddenly you're like, wait, stop. I need to go back and get training on something new all over again, because obviously so many people are scared of doing that. You know, you're over the age of 25. Oh God, I would never in my 30s go back to study.
Yeah.
Was that strange for you? Were you feeling out of place in the classroom?
Actually, I think I would really recommend it, because I think when you go to university, you're kind of like, why am I here? Unless you're really, really driven, or really driven by parental pressure. You know, university is a place where you have fun and etc. and the learning is slightly secondary. Going back as an older student, it was a postgrad, so it wasn't too bad. I was the median age of people going back into studying, because it's always a postgrad. And I really, really would always recommend it to be something that you do a little bit later when you've got some life experience. And I was so driven to do my studying. It was, you know, there were pockets of times I had 3 small children in the house. At that point, I was sort of having to write my dissertation the day after I'd given birth to my 3rd child. I think I found out I was pregnant with Devon about 6 months into the course. And so I was literally sitting, writing all my course notes up, having given birth the day before.
Oh my goodness.
And having it literally we had to go and buy a rubber ring for me to sit on so that I could get my essay in, which obviously should have been in before I'd given birth, but you know, I'm not very good on that front.
So wait, sorry, can you go back a second? What did you say? You had just given birth and then you had to go in and give your exam.
I should have written one of my papers before I gave birth.
Oh my God.
But I just couldn't get my brain in the zone. I was so stressed about the fact that the baby was laid, blah, 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 blah.
That might have had something to do with it.
I mean, fair enough.
So I
She's
couldn't
birthing a
concentrate on
child.
this paper, but I didn't want to ask for extra time. So I gave birth on the 1st, and then I had to put the paper in by the 3rd of April.
Oh my goodness.
And so for the 2, I came out of hospital and just typed like a crazy person.
Super high on all the chemicals from the birth.
Exactly. Oxytocin is a great thing, honestly. It's really, I think you can do anything. I really do. Because I probably look back and think it was really tough. But I had these 3 little babies and was studying and had time to do just about enough. Yeah, sorry, I'm suddenly thinking, how hard was it? It was pretty hard, actually, thinking about it.
Studying.
But when you're 30, you just think that that's it. You've got to be established. You've got to know what you're doing. You get to my age and you think, God, I was such a baby at 30. I had so much more. Why would anyone hesitate?
Of course, it's crazy. And I think you have that in so many different stages of your life. You're 15 and you think, oh my God, I'm 15. And then you're 20 and then you get to 30. And I can imagine you keep getting that. And it's important to remind yourself at your current age, whichever it is, this is you now and you're allowed to change and become something else.
I've got a colleague who retrained in her 50s and is now one of the best, literally one of the leading psychologists, but she didn't actually start her degree until her mid-50s, I don't think. So I think you can do it at any point.
I love that.
You've just got to have the energy and the curiosity.
How did the people close to you, your friends, your family, your parents, your partner react to this kind of career change?
I think everybody took it quite well. I'm sort of trying to go back 20 years and see how people perceived it. I suppose friends probably were a bit shocked that I'd gone from having a mega career to completely retraining to do, psychology in couples and then moving it on to sex. And I think there was a little bit of a rebellious part of me that kept saying, I don't just want to be a therapist. My image of a therapist was sort of like a 70-year-old woman in a grey cardigan going, I'm wondering how you feel. And I was like, it's just not really a conversation starter for me. Whereas when you go to a dinner party and say, oh yeah, I'm a sex therapist, it lands so well.
That's why
it creates silences, or people start talking to you.
Everyone wants to be
I've got a friend of a friend, exactly. And I think there's a little rebellious part of me that always wanted to just go, oh, sod it, I'm gonna
do this.
I'm gonna do this.
Yeah.
Was it expected, do you think?
Yeah, I think I've always been the slightly gobby one, the person who slightly talks about things we shouldn't really talk about, and therefore, I think it felt like quite a natural progression for me in one way. My mother was horrified at one point. The idea that any of her children would both go into psychology and also talk about sex was just an anathema to her. She was completely bemused by that. But she's been fantastically supportive since. No, I think people were pretty much cool. I think that it amused everybody. Suddenly they could say, oh, and this is our friend, the sex therapist, And
Let's ask Poppy.
And the partner you had at the time, was he supportive of this career choice?
He was amazing, actually. He didn't blink. I looking back on it, I can't believe that he didn't blink, actually. He was very, very just, get on with it.
That's really supportive.
Yeah, I'm very supportive, so I was incredibly lucky in that stage.
Did you ever doubt your decision? Like once you started undertaking this path, were there moments where you were unclear, uncertain?
No, I think there were times, because I carried on sort of working part-time while studying as well. And for a bit, and then once I'd qualified, I was sort of running a business, and I was also being a therapist. So I would sort of like see clients in the morning, see clients in the evening, and juggle things. Yeah. And it was just feeling really split. I just couldn't get my head around, and I could never think that I'd make a full-time career as a therapist, because I still had this business career going on at the same time. And then actually, what was really helpful is when my now husband said to me, "Sweetheart, just choose. Choose either business or therapy, but I'll support either option." And so I chose the therapeutic route. The minute I decided, right, that's what I'm going to do, it just flourished. Everything fell into place. I could work it. And at that point, it was just like, okay, I found my calling. I'm happy here.
That is so beautiful. Poppy, how did you handle being a sex therapist alongside being a mother of 3 children?
Because obviously when you started studying, they were kids, but then they come to age, they're suddenly teenagers, and you're a mom, but you're also a sex therapist, and you're a sex therapist mom, and
that's just really hard. That's just wow.
That has implications, of course, to it. And were there repercussions at school? How did they feel?
I think you probably have to ask them the real truth. But from what I observed of it,
we'll see them later.
The oldest child, Alderney, was pretty chilled about it. I think she was very matter of fact about it. She's never really been very curious about what I do. She's just very easygoing about it. A lot of her friends had these fantasies that we'd be talking about sex the whole time at the dinner table.
Dildos everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. Louis was more in the coalface because his school wanted me to come and give lectures and do the PSHE talks there. My son was at times mortified by it. And when he was at school, the school kept saying, "Oh, you've done a whole lot of research around porn and around consent, consent and etc." And he just was like literally on his knees going, "Mummy, I'm begging you, please, please, please do not do this while I'm still at school." Louis would be like, "Dead body and over it. Not until I leave the school." And then his sister was at the school as well, and she was like, "No, not until I leave the school. Forget it. You cannot come in, Mum. Do not tell them you're a sex therapist. Please don't do that." And then Devon was younger, and she actually had the most sort of exposure to it in many ways, because she was much younger when I was training and then when I set up my business. And so I used to find her quite happily waiting for me while she was meant to be doing her homework, going through things like the Dorling Kindersley magic of sex, and sort of putting post-it notes in the bits that she wanted to have questions about. And she was always really inquisitive, and I think possibly to try and be a bit of a wind-up merchant at times, she would sort of drop these clangers of questions in the most inappropriate, like, no.
It's Christmas, stop it.
So actually, I think she was outed me more than I outed her, or she embarrassed me sometimes more than I embarrassed her. She's got a really, she's so sound about things now. She's got really good self-esteem in that area. I don't worry about my girls, or in fact any of my children, in that sort of sexual arena, because I think it's been such an open part of our dialogue. Boundaried, but open.
It's interesting to hear you talk about kids, and I wonder, do you agree with the notion that, you know, you wouldn't ever say that children are curious about sexuality, but they really are. At least I remember as a kid, I just subconsciously, obviously I didn't know what I was interested in or what was going on, but I think children are very curious and need to explore. You need to allow
That's how
your
we
kids.
learn, isn't it?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Absolutely, and I think in this day and age, it's probably even more important because there's so much incorrect and inappropriate content out there that if the kids are left to their own devices, they're going to be curious anyway. That's how we learn. That's, you know, we evolve as human beings by being curious and learning through that. And if parents try and shut down that conversation, and if parents don't give the appropriate sort of sexual education there of consent, of just literally this is what sex is about, this is what loving sex is about, because they don't get those lessons.
The most important.
And I think my fear is if as a parent you don't do that, then your kids go off and they go and self-educate through porn and through what's going on at school and societal norms, which are totally out of your control. And then they've got no sort of baseline for it. So they haven't got anything really quite healthy underneath it.
And also I think of parents, at least in my experience, when I would see parents would be very protective, they would shield their kids. Often these kids became the craziest.
Yeah, that's so
Absolutely.
true.
Whereas I sort of hope, and I might be wrong, I'll be proven wrong by my lot, but I feel like their exposure to very normal conversations around relationships and sex has left them all in their 20s feeling quite healthy in that space.
Yeah. And the stigmatizing also the whole thing.
And we're curious now to know about you. We've asked about your friends, we've asked about your partner, your relatives, but how did becoming a sex therapist change your life? Did you gain confidence from it? Do you think it might have even, you know, you might have even discovered and found out things about yourself you weren't aware of? I'm not asking about your sex life, but I am asking about
Just tell us more.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, I mean, you know, you're constantly evolving as a human being. Well, you should be. And if you're not evolving, something's stuck. You need to change. So I've definitely grown, changed, expanded as, you know, as a sex therapist. It's inevitable. You're reading about it the whole time. You're conversing about it. People bring experiences into the room and you're like, oh, okay. Let me think about that. That's new. That's different. So, yeah, I think it has. And I think there is something about the permission giving of being a sex therapist that allows you to talk about it very openly with people and also talk about it inside yourself, have that own internal dialogue that's really interesting. It's really, you know, because every time, you know, we change. You guys are, what, in your 20s now? Yeah. I mean, in my 20s, my sex life was one type. Then I had children. It becomes a secondary type. And now I'm in my 50s and it's evolving again. And it's constantly evolving.
Do you still have sex? Sorry. More than me for sure.
That is definitely true.
Thank you so much. You know. Okay, more specifically about your job. Who is the average client you would get? Is there like a specific type? Or do you see a pattern of like people who come?
It's so interesting, you know, the client base goes from 18 to something like mid-80s.
You're joking, mid-80s.
Yeah. My oldest client, I think, was about 84.
Whoa.
And so, guys, you've got a long time going to be sexual if you want to be. The most phenomenal kind of body of work that I did with a couple who wanted to still be able to have sex occasionally and trying to work out how to take the Viagra, how to be turned on, how to use lube. So fun and so life-affirming to think, oh, great, in my 80s, I'm still going to be wanting to do some of this.
That is insane. At 84, you said earlier?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, because if you think about it, there's this idea that, you know, you hit your 50s and 60s and husbands, you got to go to the babysitters and wives.
Just get on the shelf and put the dust on yourself.
Exactly.
It's a pretty terrifying concept. I think it's moved so much.
Yeah, it's true. But 84, minchia, I can't make inappropriate jokes.
No.
84, you got to watch out with the good old movements.
The oxygen tank.
I'm not joking, we did have those kind of conversations about positions.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
Yeah. You don't want to pop your hip when you're in the middle of doing something. Can you imagine it?
I would be,
So,
awkward.
You accidentally puncture a lung, you're like,
Okay.
it's so good, keep going. Okay, I'm joking, sorry. So 84 years old, your oldest client.
yeah,
Crazy. What's the
Wow.
youngest client?
18.
Damn.
Yeah, that's 18 in one day.
With a young person, for example, it's I want to break my virginity, but I'm too scared. Or, you know, if you're a young man, for example, I'm so scared about having sex that I actually can't keep my erection. What am I going to do about it? And of course, when it happens, when you're at that age, it only has to happen about 3 times before it gets really quite hardwired into the brain.
Yeah.
As I have a problem. And so that's really fun work normally because you can do some really quick anxiety busting work. Right, let's talk about the anxiety. Let's talk about all the tools and techniques we've got to stop the anxiety. Let's do a whole lot of sex ed around what sex is about and how you can do it and strategies you can have. And generally that's quite short-term work.
Yeah.
Or they might come in, I might do a month with somebody, and then they'll come in once a month for 6 more months and keep me updated of what they're doing and whether they've managed to find a partner. And sometimes it's about giving them the social confidence to go out and be a virgin and start dating. It's fabulous work. I love that bit.
That's really interesting when you said about something can happen 3 times before it wires up in your brain as like a fact. If you probably don't get an erection 3 times in a row, you might start assuming immediately like, oh, I have a problem.
I would definitely encourage people to go earlier rather than later when there's a sexual dysfunction. So often, they get to the point, and so if you think about it from the couple point of view, if you're in a couple, and let's just say it's a sort of a heterosis couple, the issues that go around that maybe either he can't get it up or she's got a dysfunction like vaginismus, which is the involuntary contraction of the pelvic floor. It makes penetration really difficult. And they go through that and then they start making up the story around that. So can I not penetrate her because she's not turned on? Am I not good enough? Am I doing something wrong?
And a lot of men are uneducated and they don't, and women
Absolutely.
don't even know what vaginismus is.
Exactly. So, what's wrong with me? And then unfortunately sometimes, doctors can be particularly unhelpful. And I've had people coming in and say, well, he just told me to use a lot of lube and then push through. And I'm like, oh my God. Like, please, no, don't do that.
Ouch. Wow.
But also, if you've got a boyfriend and he can't get his penis up, for example, that's really hard because he's not getting an erection. Is it me? Is it you?
Yeah, exactly. People.
He's going, oh my God, every time he or she comes near me, I'm not getting the erection. What's wrong with me? Nowadays, I find a lot of people start taking Viagra to mask that.
Oh my God.
But then the Viagra can only work for as long as you're not anxious. But anxiety and adrenaline are really, really strong. Adrenaline's a mega hormone. It sort of trumps everything else. So the minute you start releasing adrenaline and fear, you can't get an erection. Somebody once said to me, and I've always used this as a quote with clients, nobody ran away from a mammoth with an erection. And what they're trying to say is when you are in that fight-flight system,
You're not going to be
you're
able
not going to be able to do it.
Yeah, no,
And of course, you're in that fight system around sex if you're scared about not getting an erection in the first place. So it becomes self-perpetuating. Yeah, I love it when somebody comes in and goes, this is the problem. I'm like, oh, okay, bring it on. Let's come and sit down. Let's work through this. We can do this. I'm always amazed at who does come through the door. The only thing we'd say is actually for everybody who does come through the door, whatever state of play they're at, whether they're single, married, in a poly relationship or anything like that, it's always really interesting to see what they bring. And I just feel so humbled in a way that they trust me with something that is so vulnerable for them and so precious for them. It's amazing.
Poppy and Addie are actually dying to know, has there ever been a moment where you had to break off contact with a client?
Like you just could not work with them at all.
Yeah.
Rarely.
But it has.
Tell us more.
We want to know
Give
the
us
tea.
cookies.
Give us the
She doesn't like them.
No, I do. I really like them.
I love our cookie.
I will in a minute. I think the only time I've said to either an individual or to a couple, look, I think we should finish the sessions, is when they really don't want to move, in actual fact. That they are so embedded in their position, and no matter how many times you've gone around it or tried to solve it, for whatever reason, they are very hardwired, taken that position, they're not going to move. Sometimes, we might work with it for a year, but at some point you have to sort of call that out and go, look, at the end of the day, all I can do is give you the tools to improve things.
Yeah.
If you choose to stick in this misery, I can't really do much about it now.
Yeah, you can't force them.
And there's a really good sort of therapeutic stance of detachment from outcome. Obviously, I really want to help the people that can work with me. But if they don't want to do the work, if even after I've given them all the tools, they still choose to be in that position, then I'll just say, look,
It's not me, it's
you.
you.
Yes, exactly. That old line, exactly.
You are the problem.
Yeah, that cookie bit, because I can't reach it
This
through the
tiny
microphone.
one.
Yeah, if I move, that microphone
It was
goes.
a mess.
Has there ever been a moment where you were accused of why the relationship wasn't working?
I'm a relationship terrorist.
Like come and sabotage.
That kind of thing does happen. I think people not often, but there are times where whatever's going on in the relationship is so painful, but they can't take ownership of their own stance in that. And so they're quite, at that point, they've got to have someone else to blame.
Yeah.
And the therapist is sort of the easiest object in that space.
Of course.
And sometimes I say to clients, sometimes I own it, and I say, look, this relationship's a shit show at the moment. It's a real mess. But the good news is you're probably going to walk out of this session and bond over hating me. And that's okay. It's better than you hating each other right now. I can happily be the bad object and work through that with you, but at least you can bond over that. And that's the more light version of that. But there are times where, yes, you can't help someone, or they might feel very threatened. I think there's a lot of ideas. I think people think, oh, great, sex therapist, she's going to know everything. And if you're not getting on with me, if we're just not gelling, or there's a lot of defensiveness, or there's a lot of anxiety, sometimes they will say, it's your fault, you just didn't get me. And sometimes I might be at fault, by the way. I don't think a therapist is God. I think a therapist is just a human who's doing their best to work with the data in front of them and try and help. But you don't always get it right.
I am very interested in the topic of infidelity. Is it something that you handle a lot in your practice?
Not so much in the sex therapy, but in the relationship therapy.
Why would you say people cheat?
Oh, that's $1 million question.
Yeah.
People cheat for lots of different reasons, depending on context, setting, etc. So, sometimes people cheat from a position of entitlement, for example. So that's sort of, I'm not getting it where I want to get it, and therefore I'm entitled to get it somewhere else.
Yeah, but just kind of blaming also the other person.
Yeah,
being like,
exactly.
you're not doing enough, so I deserve
this in some way, therefore I'm going to seek it out somewhere else.
That is really ugly.
And that's a really tough one.
Yeah, it's really...
Because it's really anti-relational. In longer term relationships, you get people who have affairs because they're just not being heard. They're not really seen in their marriage. They might have been standing up silently screaming to be heard, and they're not getting it. And then they can't leave their marriage for whatever reason. Maybe there's kids involved or whatever. And they go off and they find an emotional affair or a sexual affair. But more often than not, it's because actually they want to just be heard.
Yeah.
A lot of people tend to say, oh, don't break up because of the kids, stay together for the kids. Do you believe in that? Do you think that if two people can't anymore stand each other, people who have put in the work, who have tried to fix it and it's not working, would you still say stay together for the kids?
No.
Because I think that could have a negative impact on the long term.
If you think about kids, they're like little sponges. They absorb everything that's going on.
They're very receptive.
Yeah. So, sorry, tracking back one bit, I don't think every relationship has to break up because of an affair. I think sometimes an affair happens, it highlights the dysfunction in the marriage or the relationship, and then it can be a real opportunity to start again or to start anew, either together or separately. And it takes a lot of work, and I really admire the people that do it. I do a lot of work with it, and I really admire the people that sit in there and grind through it and process their rage and their shame and their guilt and etc. And they come out with a better relationship. Like sometimes talk about the marriage when it's been broken by infidelity as and then put back together as the art of kintsugi.
Yeah, of the
Japanese art with the gold, where when ceramic is broken and you fix it and then you highlight the fix rather than trying to hide it. You highlight it with gold, and I think it's a really beautiful thing to do with the ceramic, and I think it's an even more beautiful thing to do with the marriage. You can come out of it better than you went in many ways, but they have to do the work.
Of course, must.
But if people get to the point where, and it doesn't need to be about an infidelity, if it just get to the point where they got together on one premise, they've both changed, they've both grown, but in separate directions, and there's kids involved, I don't think that staying together for the kids is always the best option. Sometimes it can be. If you can live amicably in that state, great. But actually, if you end up pathologically loathing each other, it's far better for everyone to get divorced.
I've never heard anyone say that, first off, and also I think it's a really tough pill to swallow. If there has been cheating, maybe that's something that highlights your issues, and you guys should try and fix that instead
work
of
on
just
that.
slamming the door in someone's face and being like, okay, I'm leaving. Then that leaves so many unanswered questions in the relationship, and then that can lead to even bigger problems.
It builds up anger, whereas this is a very beautiful way of kind of allowing positivity and love to
I mean, it is really hard. It requires huge amounts of care and respect and patience and trust, and when you're rebuilding the trust is so complex with a couple, but when we get through that, it's extraordinary.
Would you say that cheating is more common nowadays compared to before? Like, would you say there is some sort of intergenerational difference between, perhaps your generation and ours?
No, I don't think so at all. I think infidelity, cheating has been going on ad infinitum since we started having sex. I think it would be a more interesting question to say, is monogamy something that's been thrust upon us either from religion or from a sort of political context? Because actually, are we meant to be, a lot of people, and I'm not saying this is my stance particularly, but a lot of people would actually say, are we actually meant to be monogamous? So no, I think every generation has got its infidelities going straight through it.
I'm wondering because, one topic we speak about a lot is kind of social media and this choice overload you almost have at this point where everyone's showing off, the best version of themselves, and that creates a lot of tension and tons of but even of our friends. So many friends of mine, they come and complain and like, I found out that my boyfriend liked a video of this girl and XYZ, and cheating now is like truly on a spectrum. And you have to understand for yourself where your boundaries are.
And what you consider cheating, and it might
Exactly.
be completely different from what your
For
partner
the next
considers
person,
cheating.
100%.
Yeah.
And I'm just, sometimes I contemplate on whether, social media and having access to so much information about everyone through literally an app on your phone, whether that contributes to perhaps an increase in infidelity, whether that is violently making out with someone or having intercourse, like,
Or just liking a post and someone
Yeah,
can
maybe
say
that.
Yeah, that bit
Or
you
messages.
see, that's the bit I find really interesting at the moment, and I'm struggling to find my own positioning with it, because actually quite often I think you have to be led by what the client feels. But it does feel to me that there is a generation of younger people coming through saying, for example, as you were saying on social media, she liked this video, this person, whatever, and that's not okay. And I'm like, oh, this is quite complex. It's the same as tracking apps on a phone as well. It's like, how much control do you need to have over your partner and their inner world?
that's
I
true.
personally do not agree at all with a tracking app. If I were to get one for my partner, oh my god, I would obsessively check it, and then I would, on my own, I would just trick myself into being like, what was he doing there? What was happening? Like, we were not meant to know all
Everything.
the time
No.
what's
I agree.
going on. Is there a difference between then and now? Because at the time, in the 90s, you only had a phone.
When I
and-
first got married, we had a mobile phone, but it wasn't, it was a Nokia brick.
Exactly.
And you were lucky if it worked. So, I remember things like, a child needing to go to hospital and just not being able to get hold of my husband
That's
for
crazy.
6
Yeah.
hours. And that was normal. That's okay. I mean, I prefer that kind of idea in many ways, because it allowed you to you had to self-regulate, self-soothe, and get on with it. The only time I really can kind of would say to couples, look, it's okay to have a tracking app, is if there has been an infidelity and you are working through it in therapy together.
And you need them to
Yeah.
trust each
Yes,
other.
and you need to build up total transparency and trust. But then I would always liken it to a leg brace. After an injury, you have that brace to support you and give you the help to recover from the injury, but you have to get it off your leg at some
Yeah.
point.
You really have to be in a mindset where you're capable of accepting and forgiving, most importantly.
And also, this is obviously, I don't think this can be statistically proven, but, or maybe it can. Do you think there is a gender which tends to be more unfaithful than the other? And if so, which one is it?
I don't think there is.
Really?
No, I don't think so. I
That's
think
surprising.
there may be different reasons for why they stray.
I often hear people say is men cheat physically, but women cheat emotionally. And this idea that, if that man went and slept with someone else, it wasn't because he didn't love his girlfriend, he just had to satisfy
like,
a
he
need.
needs to-
But when women cheat, and I think this should be debunked, absolutely not, because a woman could also maybe just cheat to satisfy a physical need and not because she doesn't love her partner
Yeah,
anymore.
that's so true.
But
We
vice
always
versa, maybe the man is also cheating because he emotionally
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
into someone else. I think
These
it's
very
the
gender
same,
stereotypes don't really help anymore, do they?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very
I think they've been imposed on us for centuries. That men have an animalistic drive for sex, and women are good girls that don't want it.
We don't want to have sex. We've never had a drive in our life, right? That's
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
wait, what is it?
No,
I get
exactly.
forced
We
to
have no
it.
agency, and
I
we have
actually
no
do not like
voice in
it,
that
no.
space. Really glad that the generation coming up, my generation, and in fact, when you think of the sexual liberation that happened in the 70s and 80s, we're thankful that movement did happen, that we're able to have a voice, that we're able to be something that's not just wearing a skirt and an apron in the
Yeah.
kitchen anymore, that we can have our own drive and our own desires and own it and not be ashamed of it. So going back to your question about who does or doesn't, or why they do or don't, I don't think we can stereotype in that way anymore. There may be a bit of a gender bias one way or the other, but women sometimes cheat because they have a physical need, and men sometimes cheat because they want to have an emotional need. I think most affairs generally, unless, as I was saying earlier, unless they come from that place of entitlement of I want, therefore I should have, most affairs come from a place of I'm really unhappy in where I am and I don't know how to move it on.
So we know that you treat couples, you treat individuals, but Adi and I want to know, do you treat throuples or more? And by this I mean, do you have any polyamorous clients coming to you?
Yeah, and it's a really brilliant, but it's a really interesting place to be working in at the moment, because the social norm of it's got to be just, you've got to be in a monogamous relationship and there's just a dyad. It's being challenged, and I think it's brilliant that it's being challenged. There's so many healthy options within that.
Wow.
It sort of links in with that whole concept of, look, if you think about affairs and how many marriages break down because of affairs, actually having a very grown-up discussion about having an open relationship and consensual non-monogamous relationship, or you can call it an open relationship, a monogamish relationship, it just puts the whole conversation on the table to be thought about in a really mature way. So I love it when people come in and say, look, this is what we want to discuss. Either we want to discuss how we're going to do this, or we're going to discuss how we're going to deal with our children around this, or how we're going to message it to the outside world. And work with them, either with the sort of original couple, or indeed sometimes with a throuple who are dealing with how do they navigate and negotiate the dynamics of three in that.
Of course.
Wow.
It's really fascinating. I love every bit of the work when I'm doing that.
Yeah, and people always say that 3 is a crowd, but maybe 3 is a party. And
To me, that's just such an interesting and unknown world. I can think of 1,000 reasons why I would straight away be like, oh wow, that must be really challenging.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel as if the way I've always thought about this is that maybe people can be polyamorous because they have a bit of a fear of commitment. And you do not want to settle down for one person necessarily, and you do want to, still have fun and see what's out there to also satisfy various needs that maybe only one person cannot take care of completely.
or maybe you're emotionally stunted from a really horrible relationship, and then suddenly you're like, oh, I never want to be hurt again. I'm not putting all of my eggs in one basket.
I think you've got to look at where people are coming from originally when they choose to move into polyamory. And that may be coming from a position of response to something negative in their lives. It may be from an insecure attachment pattern. It could be, as you say, from a trauma or relational trauma in that space. But there is what's called secure attachment in polyamory, which is going, I'm actually really quite secure in this space, and therefore I don't need to identify with just one person in my life.
Yeah.
I can be with you, but I can also allow you to be with somebody else, or indeed I can be with somebody else. And that's really good. And it doesn't stop me loving you, and I don't need to get jealous about it or possessive about it.
Yeah.
It's interesting. There are a lot of polyamory people who are coming from such a positive place about it.
Yeah. You must be in a really healthy mentality for sure to be able to allow not only seeing being at peace with the idea of your partner getting shared with other people.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I was literally listening to Esther Perel's latest podcast on the Where Should We Begin podcast. And there's a couple on there who were a French couple or a Belgian couple who are in a polyamorous relationship. But then he broke the rules of the polyamorous relationship because theirs was very simple, this couple. They had a child together. They were always going to be the couple, but they were both allowed to have other partners. But he broke the golden rule of not talking to her beforehand when he did it and not using a condom.
That's crazy that you can set rules, set boundaries, and
Yeah.
someone still, there can still be all of that trust, all of that openness, all of that willingness to make something work, and one of the two will fuck it up.
Yeah.
So how can you double check this? How can you know that he is?
Did he admit
Because
it?
there was a child. So there was
Oh!
so he then got this person pregnant.
Oh no.
And they already had a kid.
Yes,
Oh
but
my
he
God.
ended up having a kid with this other woman. They had to do paternity tests.
Oh wow.
But the most interesting part of it for me was the fact that in that kind of open relationship, you choose your own rules.
Yeah.
And it's so fascinating
It's
to
very-
not be bound by the societal ones. Why should you be in this day and age?
Yeah.
But that's what I think is so deceitful, right? People aren't straight up with it, and they're not immediately saying, oh, I'm polyamorous. That's when I wonder if it is a trend nowadays. People excuse their shitty behavior and their lack of communication and being like, oh no, I'm polyamorous. Like,
It's not living it to the way it should be lived.
Yeah.
Exactly, because the whole point of polyamory, at least from what I've gathered, and obviously never experienced, but gathered, is it's all about being open and being communicative and being
Utterly
truly
respectful
transparent.
and- yeah.
Exactly. So it's just interesting. And also with Adi, we were saying how many people, ironically, sometimes end up in a polyamorous relationship, not really because they want to, but because they hope to satisfy
Yeah.
the partner, or they know they can't have the person another way. So, okay, I'm going to make this
I'm
work.
gonna do
and
this
then-
too exactly because he is or she is.
And they're
that-
unhappy
Yeah.
then because they never
But that
get
goes beyond polyamory. That goes in any part of a relationship. If you try and shapeshift to be something for someone else,
Of course.
it's always going to be losing strategy.
Never
isn't it?
force it.
You're
You're
so
gonna say
wise,
never.
Poppy.
Yeah,
you should be a therapist.
Did anyone ever
I'll bear that in mind.
Well, you know the sigla of Pornhub? Not that I know it. No idea.
I heard it from a friend.
Yeah, no.
But yes, what we're all here for, pornography, porn, what do you think of it, Poppy? Do you think it is negative or positive?
I think it can be both. Okay. I think it really, really can be both. You know, it depends on which way it's being used. It's helped minorities find each other and find things that are for them, you know, in terms of their kink, their interest, etc. And in that sense, it leaves people feeling far less isolated. So that can be a real positive. I think it can be used by couples really effectively at times. For example, lots of people use it for foreplay, and that's part of their arousal is using porn together. I think where it goes wrong is where it's used in a singularity and in sort of a non-relational way. So I work with a lot of people who have got kind of really problematic use of porn, where they might be looking at porn 4 or 5 times a day.
Oh, wow.
They will be masturbating to that. They don't know how to get an erection without using porn. They don't know how to have partnered sex. Quite often their partners are thinking, what the hell's wrong with me? Why is he or she not interested in me? Or if they are, why is our sex very transactional? So, for example, I was working with a couple where he really did have a problematic use of porn and had from a very, very early age. So he kind of expected his girlfriend to be a bit like a laptop. I open it, I press on, I press play, and
get it going.
What do you know? I can have sex. And she was like, I think you'll find there's like this whole erotic part of me that needs surfacing before you come anywhere near my vagina.
Crazy.
You know. So I think that's where it's really negative. And I think whilst it's also really good in some ways for things like sexual education, in other ways it can be really divisive because, you know, I think there's a normalization of sort of violence against women in that state. I think there's a normalization of things like anal sex that not everyone wants to experiment with. I've got to always remember I see a clinical sample of people, so it's not a population. I see the people for whom it's not working, where either it's become so problematic they can't actually keep a job down, or they can't hold a relationship together, or they can't have sex with their partner.
S&M, let's talk about kink and fetishes and fantasies at this point. But first off, everyone uses these two words quite
interchangeably.
Loose. What is the difference between a kink and a fetish? So
a kink is normally something that is part of the play. It can be an interest. It doesn't have to be really tightly defined. It's part of the sexual story. A fetish generally is the sexual story, so people are much more dominated by needing to have that fetish in there for them to be sexually aroused to the highest degree. Whereas a kink can just be a bit of an interest.
So a fetish is essential to the person.
Yeah. So for example, you know, a shoe fetish where you could only get turned on by a particular type of stiletto heel being placed on your chest.
We were just speaking about heels earlier when we were brainstorming fetishes.
Or you know, I can only get to the point of arousal or an orgasm if somebody pisses on me. Whereas a kink can be incorporated, like BDSM play is more of a kink than a fetish, unless it becomes the dominant thing. It's part of the smorgasbord that is your sexual relationship, as opposed to the main dish of it. Okay. Does that make sense?
That's very interesting.
So you said that a fetish is kind of the only thing that can turn you on. And it's very exclusive. Like, it's either this or nothing.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. So you were just saying about stilettos, which is, ironically, we were just talking about this earlier. We were thinking, is there perhaps a direct correlation between something that occurred in your childhood and the kinks that you develop later on in life?
Exactly, because with shoes, it could be you always saw your mother wear heels. And obviously men are going to be like, I would never think of my mother. Subconsciously, maybe your child's self felt love and excitement seeing your mother, and then suddenly you need to see a woman
suddenly
in
you're turned
6-inch
on by
heels.
Yeah. Well, so here's something.
Like that.
Your sexual templates get really defined between about the ages of 7 and 10.
Crazy.
Whoa.
So girls get defined slightly earlier, sort of 7 or 8, and boys are sort of 8, 9, 10. So that's when your sexual templates really get formed. Do you know what I mean by templates?
Like the blueprint.
The blueprint, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So if you think about it in that way, then yes, so often kinks come through from something in childhood, and quite sometimes we use a fantasy or a kink in that way to sort of actually allow us to process a trauma that might have happened in childhood.
That's crazy. So you're soothing a childhood trauma in a certain sense when you let loose and explore your fetishes. That's very interesting.
Yeah, that's exactly. How come that age?
I don't know. It's just the age that psychiatrists and psychologists have been able to pinpoint at what point did this start. I mean, I think going back to the previous conversation we were having, I think children are very sexual beings. Yeah. It's not appropriate to act that out, and it's not appropriate to overeducate them. But we've got to understand that there is a sexuality in there that's there from birth effectively that just develops and develops.
Of course, and especially, you know, you go around life learning continuously, feeling, most importantly, for the first time, certain feelings.
We were talking about our friends how we like used to play doctor, and then no one was actually a doctor in there. As a couple, you believe it is essential that people do communicate their fantasies and kinks and fetishes, if not just to get them out on the table and see how someone responds and not repress them, maybe, because that could lead to something
Well,
worse.
I think one of the saddest things is when I see someone who has got a kink or a fetish and cannot tell their partner about it, and then carry this load of shame around with them the whole time. And also, quite often, that shame stops them from communicating to say, hey, look, honey, these are the kind of things I'm interested in. It gives the partner the right to say, oh, what do you know? I don't mind playing that game for a bit, as long as it's part of what I want to.
Of course.
Other times it might be, actually, that's not for me. And then the couple can have a conversation about that. But it's far better to have communicated it, definitely. And it's just how you get over that shame.
Do you think young people are starved of intimacy and a real connection and are seeking it more now than before?
Can I just ask, what do you actually mean by that then? What's the question?
What do we mean by that?
I tend to, like, everyone tends to be quite unhappy. I don't want to be a dick, but, like, it's more common that my friends are unhappy and, I'm seeking a relationship and they're struggling finding it, rather than, I'm enjoying myself and having a healthy relationship. I think it's the sense of people want relationships but are finding a harder time connecting in this day and age. Maybe because there's more independence, maybe because it's being pushed more that you should be a woman focusing on you, you don't need a man, and you should be a man who doesn't need a girl because you have a job, and then suddenly you realize, oh wait, I can't admit that I want someone else because maybe that makes me incomplete or makes me dysfunctional. There's nothing wrong if me or Adi want to go home and we are very happy with our lives, very happy with our jobs, but you really seek affection.
No, I think it is. I do think it's the hardest time now for anybody, because I think there are so many mixed messages. As you just referenced, you know, you should be independent, but you actually really want to be dependent. Social media makes out that you should have this amazing life and you should have this amazing partner, and it's not all there. So I think it is really tough. I think half the problem, actually, one of the biggest, and the irony is that we're talking about this and we're doing it on a podcast that people will listen to on their phones, is I think screen's the biggest problem around intimacy these days. You know, how often do you actually make the effort to sit at a table, put your phone down and talk to the person in front of you?
And be really connected.
So, the moment we've all been waiting for. I don't know why I say it like that.
Are you excited by it?
So, what is your advice for young people looking to find love?
The $1 billion question that we want to know the answer to, I think, isn't it?
Give
and
us
not
the
necessarily just young people. But I think learning to be authentic, really learning to be authentic, not having to shapeshift around somebody else, what you think somebody else wants of you, is really, really important. I think loving yourself, and not in a narcissistic way, not in a, you know, I'm so important, but if you don't like yourself, it's really difficult to get love from somebody else.
Of course.
And I think you know, at its worst, I see a lot of people coming and going, but I need them to make me complete.
Yeah.
And that's a losing strategy.
We literally spoke about this the other day.
Actually, what you really want to do is, I'm pretty complete and I'm okay, but I'm not so barriered off that I'm not going to let somebody else into my life. It's a real difference.
Yeah.
I talk constantly about the difference between barriers and boundaries. And having really good sense of boundaries around yourself. I know what's good for me, just going back to our previous conversation about you. What's good for me versus not letting it, you know, I'm not going to let anybody in.
So, I heard you once say you really realized we have an animal side in us when you were giving birth, and how that completely
Thank you, Allegra.
I love it.
Take
and
it.
the world must not. No, but
Make what you want with it.
It's true, right? We kind of forget that it's not like we were born in houses made out of bricks and then wore ties and went to cocktail parties. Like, no, we used to be animals before. And I wonder, is when we have sex and when we engage in sexual intercourse, when the most primal, instinctive and animalistic side of us takes over?
Just slightly changing the question, I think we always have that part of ourselves that comes from an animal in the first place. So if you think about how connected you are and how healthy it can be for you to, for example, stroke a cat or a dog, and how it will literally bring down your neurological wiring into a much safer place. We are built for things like touch. We can't rationalize that. We can't overthink that. It's literally something that happens to our systems. So there is always that thread running, that part of us that is in that space. But then we also have this fantastic frontal precortex that keeps us safe and brings us on and develops us. I think that when we have sex and we are able to abandon ourselves, in part we are abandoning that frontal precortex part of ourselves that controls and etc. and allows that more limbic system to kick in and release it. And so often, so when people say they can't have an orgasm, for example, quite often they are very fearful of letting go and being in that rather animalistic state. Yeah, I think we don't want to think about it sometimes. I do remember the moment when we were talking about it, because I remember giving birth to, I think it must have been Devon, and literally thinking, this is as close to being something completely different than I think I really am.
Yeah.
You know, we may dress up and we may wear all these nice clothes and, as you say, live in nice houses. I am doing something that has gone on for thousands and thousands of years that connects me to every other animal in this world almost.
I'm terrified of giving birth.
It's not bad. Oh, seriously, it's not too bad.
It's the most beautiful thing I will probably ever do in my
No, but
life.
it's terrifying.
And I'm looking to have children, a bunch of them. So I know, and I also want to birth them myself. Like I know what I'm gonna do. I'm just scared of it because it's incredibly
It's terrifying
painful.
growing up.
I think it is terrifying. That's, I think, why pregnancy lasts so long, by the way.
Yeah.
You get to the 9th month and you think, I don't care how it comes out. It's just got to get out now.
Yeah.
And that kind of overrides all the fear at that point.
Yeah, no, I hear that a lot actually. That they're just like at that point you just
Yeah, it's
want
like,
it, and
come on,
also you do
spaghetti.
it. It's a like once it's it comes 20 minutes. Bam. What is the most common misconception around sex you've ever heard?
Oh, there's so many. But what is the most common misconception around sex? That it's always going to work.
Nice.
So that everyone's going to come, everyone's going to have a good time.
that it
and it's
always
We're
needs
going to
to be
have
perfect.
synchronistic orgasms. It's going to be amazing. Fireworks are going to go off. It's not always like that, and that's okay. That's just life.
That's what happens.
Yeah, that's very true.
The biggest misconception about my profession is probably that people think they're going to have sex with me, or that I'm going to rate them on their sex life.
Oh.
So often I've...
Did
Maybe
they
less
ever
so...
perform for you and then they're like,
No.
so what do you think?
No, but I've had people coming into the room, less so nowadays, but certainly historically, going, so at what point do you want me to undress? And
Oh
I'm
my
like,
god.
that won't be necessary, thank
They
you very
would
much.
say that?
Yes. And couples quite often think, am I going to grade their sex life? Am I going to be in
Be
their
there in
house?
the
I'm
room
like,
with
no.
them.
I'm literally going to give you the homework and you can do it and then come back and report to
let
me,
me know
okay?
how that was.
That's incredible.
Oh, no videos, no nothing.
Damn.
Damn.
I didn't imagine that.
Oh, what a fucking scam. Let's talk about controversial stuff.
I want to pull out the stats,
Controversy.
guys.
OnlyFans content creator Bonnie Blue was recently awarded a Guinness World Record for sleeping with 1,057 men in less than 12 hours. Was that good?
That was good.
Thank you.
Tia Bollinger, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. If I'm not, forgive me. Or as everyone now knows her, Bonnie Blue.
Right.
So we've all heard what's happened. Bonnie Blue, a 25-year-old porn star, sex worker, claims, and apparently it is true, that she has slept with 1,057 guys in 12 hours. I'm here to ask, I'm not sure what I'm here to ask, but I'm here to ask, I'm sorry. I find it hard to believe because it's insane, I think, as a number, but what do you think? Do you have a take on that as a sex therapist?
I think I just have one really simple question, which is why?
Yeah.
I genuinely cannot get my head around either why she would want to do it, apart from to break a record, or indeed why any of the men involved in it would want to do that with her.
Mm-hmm. Inside.
And also imagine being literally like number 682, number,
Yeah.
I don't know, 93.
So, as I said, my overriding question is just literally why? Who wants to be involved in that and why? I'm really curious about the sort of the mindset that people had to line up and do that. And I find it quite concerning. You know, the other subject we were going to talk about.
She said pretty cool.
That, you know, in the same week, in news articles, we have 1,057 men lining up to have sex with a sex worker. And then we have 72 men on trial and 20 that weren't even found about having sex with an unconscious woman.
Yeah.
In a non-consensual way. And I feel like these messages are extreme and distorting. And
Then again, I wonder how has that emotionally, physically, mentally in any way improved your life. And she was very open on her socials saying, my family is proud of me, I'm proud of me, this has been my long time dream. And I just wondered what has gone wrong for that to be the case.
And I think it's really interesting to hear your age talking about it in that voice, because that's how I feel about it. But then I was wondering if I was having a sort of generationally distorted view on it, of thinking, well, maybe this is about female empowerment, maybe this is, you know, she's owning her own sexuality, and maybe I should be kind of going, yay, girl. But there is a very, very fundamental part of me going, I cannot understand any of the positives. I'm failing to see what she would have got out of it.
I mean, besides like the monetary compensation, which I'm assuming is
Yes, I'm sure there is that.
the main, yeah.
But would there be ever a sum of money that would ever,
never.
just the fact that she's 25 and I think I'm 25, I would never, like, just the thought of it makes me feel a bit repulsive putting my body through that. And I just, if I ever think of Bonnie Blue, it's, what's wrong with you? And if she were to say nothing, I'd say you should probably look into that and figure out what it is, because there's, if it's either you convincing yourself that's normal behavior, or the people around you that have normalized this for you because they want you to, you know, go through with it for monetary purposes, it's not fucking worth it. And I don't think you're gonna, I can't imagine you looking back in time and being happy about that.
Yeah.
So.
So Giselle Pellico, the trial that occurred, that finished just recently, I believe it was in December, finally, where this French woman was raped continuously by her husband in a period over 9 years, from 2011 to 2020. Not only from him, but from 52 other men. The way they caught Dominique was him during COVID. He would go around supermarkets filming under people's skirts.
Upskirting.
Oh my
Yeah,
God.
upskirting, exactly.
Yeah.
And
Is that
now a
true?
criminal
it's a word,
yeah.
upskirting,
And
which
it's
is
now a criminal offence in the UK.
yeah, I mean,
Oh, wow.
fair enough. That's
Yes.
fucking disgusting. So they find him upskirting people, and they seize his laptop, on which they find a tiny file called literally abuse.
Oh my God.
And there are 9 years worth of footage of Giselle Pellico, his wife, getting raped by 72 men.
Oh my God.
20 of these have not been found. 52 men have been processed, I believe, in December. Dominique is in jail for 20 years, but he's in his 80s, late 80s, so he's probably gonna
be for life.
But some of
Exactly.
these guys only got sentences of like
from 3
years.
to 15 years,
Extraordinary.
depending on the gravity of the crime. Now,
And also the way most of them got away, legally speaking.
yeah,
was by
yeah,
saying that
exactly. It was a massive trial, and the reason for which I respect Giselle so much is, I mean, she was nominated also by the Financial Times and by the BBC, like, Woman of the Year. And what I really appreciate about this is how she switched the narrative around shame, which is usually a burden that falls on the raped woman.
Yeah,
In most
absolutely.
cases, it's like, I get raped, oh, I am dirty, I am disgusting, I am the problem. And I really love how she was like, I want to make this trial public to showcase that the shame here gets reversed, and it's on these men.
It's extraordinary, her strength and her courage.
It's
to do
insane. And you see her walking into court, and people, it's really, I had goosebumps when I saw her, and it made me just, wow. How do you think something so outrageous can happen? Like, does this even fall within the category of a potential fetish, like a rape fetish, or is it just a mentally deranged person?
And is this like also, could this be a cause of not being able to distinguish, once again, reality and fantasy, and in a certain sense, by repressing these thoughts and repressing these fantasies, they become something else, which pushes someone to such a monstrous behavior, and also completely dehumanizing their partner.
I think it's extraordinary. I mean, I don't know about the direct correlation. You'd have to sort of sit with every single man that was involved to really get an understanding of what drove them, what their motivation was. But I do wonder whether there is something where we are desensitized to that kind of fantasy because we see so much of it on screens. I say we, collectively. There is so much access to that kind of porn again, and it's used in a bad way, that men are desensitized to the fact that there is actually a woman who is a living, breathing woman and a mother that they are fucking, and not something that they are seeing on screen. And I think that desensitization or dehumanization of the person has probably got huge links to what they're doing online, for example. Again, though, going back to the, who are these men that went for it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a list.
Yeah.
Their names are publicly available. I was reading into a few of them.
No, but when I say who, I mean, like, generally, what is their makeup? Why?
Well, Poppy,
It was beautiful having you here.
Thank you.
We just it was actually such an interesting session to have together, and I feel as if we've touched on some really interesting points, which I mean, it's not every day that you get to speak to a sex therapist and
Yeah,
truly
and
be
ask-
open and vulnerable and hear your professional opinion on topics which are very close to us. Now, to finalize this, what piece of advice would you give to someone who's looking to become a sex therapist?
I'd say do it. But I would say do it, but recognise that you might have to challenge yourself in that space a little bit. That all of the preconceptions you have around sex and around yourself and around what people should be doing and all the judgments you have to suspend. But it's a really brilliant job to have. And I think I said it earlier, I feel utterly humbled by people's trust in coming to see me and expose their most vulnerable fears in a way.
Poppy, such an honor to get to speak to you and to hear what you had to say and ask questions that we've maybe always wondered, and hopefully our listeners have wondered as well, and get answers from a professional. And lastly, it was just really inspiring to hear your story and just hear your journey of how you just switched your career into this and are happier because of it. And I would love to know, what is the piece of advice that you'd give to someone who is in that same position and is uncertain or afraid or hesitating if to take the big step and jump into the unknown?
I think it's always really scary to leave something secure, even if it's really horrible, if you're hating every second. But, you know, once you challenge yourself and once you kind of look at yourself really clearly and say, am I going to work every single day and enjoying myself, or am I dragging myself there and loathing every second, or even loathing 50% of it? That should give you the courage to go and do something different. It's never too late to retrain. It's never too late to change your career. So it's never too late to actually grasp what you want to do in life and get on with it. Because life is a hell of a lot more enjoyable when you're doing something you want to do.
Amen. Okay.
Guys, thank you so much.
And that
Right.
concludes our
That's
first episode.
Snack.
And yeah.
My name is
Thank
Adina.
you. And my name is Allegra.
And
And this is Poppy,
see you
our
next
lovely guest.
Poppy, thank you so much.
And wait, last question. Poppy, did you like the cookies we
I
baked
love
for
the
you?
cookies. I can't believe you made them then. I've been eating so many of them, but I didn't want to do it on screen.
bought it?
Yeah, well,
Oh my
I
God.
just,
I'll
I
take
wanted to
that.
know the bakery. Now I know that she can do it. I'm like
Allegra,
pestering her.
Look
It's
at
the
the
Snack
great-
and Yapp
it's a
bakery,
Snack and Yapp
guys.
podcast.
And yes, Poppy went for the peanut butter cookies. If you want to be our guest, you better have an interesting story. And we
the
will
good
have
cookie.
you.
Good.
Goodbye, everybody.
Hey guys,
we
made it! Woo!